Okay, so this video here is just going to focus on the last portion of the worksheet dealing with R.B. Bennett. All right, I've talked about Bennett already previously. We know we won the election in 1930. So I want to talk about this guy because he's kind of a fascinating individual, I guess, in some respects. All right, so the interesting first question had to do with Bennett himself. Why might Bennett have struggled to appeal to Canadians on a personal level during the Depression? And if you read the section here, the profile on power, the answer in this case here was tied directly to the fact that who Bennett was, I guess. Bennett did not fit the description of the average Canadian in this unprecedented period of economic despair. Bennett was he was a wealthy millionaire, stinking rich. The guy was he was a lawyer, businessman, and he was very, very wealthy. He elected to live in a hotel in Ottawa. It took the whole floor of a national hotel, luxurious residence here, because the Prime Minister's quarters on Sussex Drive weren't suited to his lifestyle. He was driven around, chauffeured around in a limousine. He wore a three-piece tuxedo all the time, top hat, pocket watch, gloves, and cane. He was wealthy, and he flaunted it, certainly. Now, some might say that's part of the reason why he won the election in 1930, the fact that he was wealthy. Insert parallels here to Donald Trump in the United States. People felt like, if this guy here could make a go of it and he was a successful businessman, maybe he would have the answers here to this economic situation. But where all of this, Bennett's personal fortune plagued him was when he had to address Canadians that were struggling, and that was the majority of all Canadians. He lacked empathy. Okay, and that word empathy here is far different than sympathy. Bennett could only sympathize with Canadians, but he couldn't empathize. And the difference between those two words is important because, when you sympathize for somebody, you're in some ways, you're pitying them. And people don't generally like to feel pitied, for their circumstance. It's belittling. Bennett couldn't empathize with Canadians, and the difference when you're, being empathetic is, you can appeal to somebody in such a way because you can say, yes, I've been there. I've walked in your shoes. I know what it's like. And when Bennett would address people, Canadians, and say, well, I know that, people here are struggling to get by, and I understand the difficulties that you're facing. Unemployment is a problem. People saw through that, and they knew that as Prime Minister, he really wasn't feeling the economic struggle. He wasn't walking in or living in the shoes of the average Canadian. And when you get into a depression where the struggles become so prolonged, people get tired of hearing that the Prime Minister, the guy who's supposed to be coming up with the answers here, feels sorry for them. It becomes a bit demeaning. So this is going to force Canadians to turn a lot of their personal animosity towards Bennett himself. And there are a variety of things that Bennett's name would be attached to. So one of the funny things, Canadians who had cars in the 20s couldn't afford the gas come the 30s. So if they still had that car, they made use of it, especially out in the countryside. They took the engines out of those cars and they hooked them up to their horses, and so they would essentially have the horses tow them around, and they would call this contraption a Bennett buggy. So that was a shot at the Prime Minister. Men who were living on the streets, who were homeless, would cover themselves with a Bennett blanket, which was really just an old newspaper. So provide them some comfort, I guess. Um, Canadians couldn't afford coffee at this time, and they called Bennett coffee, and it was basically like um, sort of like a wheat that they boiled and drank it as a replacement for coffee. So that was Bennett coffee. All right, so Bennett took the brunt of a lot of the frustrations that Canadians felt as the Depression went on, right? And it was tied directly to his lack of empathy, as he couldn't connect to Canadians. To prove this, in a moment here, Bennett was asked to speak at a convocation of a group of graduating university students. So you can imagine graduating university in a time where the economy is in the tank. You're already probably not feeling too good about your prospects of gaining employment. And when Bennett began his address to this group of graduates, he said this: one of the famous. Sorry, I got to start over. One of the greatest assets man can have in enjoying life's struggle is the experience of poverty. So he began his convocation speech this way, and he was booed off the stage. And what was Bennett trying to say? Well, he was trying to say to these young people, if you've experienced poverty, it's actually a good thing, because when you get yourself out of it, you appreciate everything you have in your life, and you'll work hard to not get, to ever get back in that impoverished state. That's what he was trying to say. But coming from a wealthy prime minister, how was it received? Well, it was received as, well, it's good for you to be poor. That's essentially what these students felt. Just on a side note, though, and credit to Bennett, many Canadians appealed to Bennett personally. They wrote him letters, struggling Canadians saying, Dad, a letter from a young boy famously was written to him, where a boy said, Dad can't find work because he's got no money for boots. He can't get a job without boots. Can you send some money for boots? And Bennett, he responded, sent a personal letter with, $10 in the mail. Other Canadians, and he did this hundreds and hundreds of times. And I guess to his credit, he was, he didn't try to grandstand on that. He did that privately, and Canadians wouldn't necessarily have known that. But to his credit, he did actually care about the plight of struggling Canadians. He just was in an impossible situation. And so much so that, after, we'll learn about the 1935 election. After following that election, Bennett returns. He goes to England, and he basically abandons the country because he felt like he was like a wanted man. All right, question 2, though. All right, so how did Bennett forever change the relationship that the government had with citizens of this country? Well, it's undoubted, as much as it might have been begrudging by Bennett, he does begin to establish what's called a social safety net for Canadians. He did provide relief programs, and the government began for the first time in our nation's history providing funds that were generated through federal spending, so came out of tax dollars somewhere, provided funds, a system of national support where the government had a role in caring for the welfare of Canadians. So this is the social safety net, which today certainly is huge. It's enormous. There are programs for Canadians that are struggling financially for a variety of reasons, and there are many different programs that exist out there that have developed over time. Bennett's really sort of the first to open the door to that idea that a government had a responsibility to care for the financial well-being of Canadians. And certainly for some of you that maybe are, even you young people, if you may be eligible for this Canadian Emergency Relief benefit that the federal government has announced. It'd be worth looking into. This might actually benefit you quite a bit if you are over 15, if you worked last year and this year, if you have a job and you are unable to go to that job, whether it's part-time or otherwise because of the coronavirus, you might be eligible to apply for this benefit. And it is it would be a generous benefit for a young person. It pays $500 a week, $2,000 a month, and you can claim this for up to 4 months if you are out of work for an extended period because of the coronavirus. So And some of you, your parents, might actually be accessing that as a, as a form of help. And that's a great example of a modern day program that's a part of the social safety net. So the other part here about Bennett changing the relationship that the government had with citizens is tied to his establishment here of a monetary policy that would be controlled by the Bank of Canada. All right, and this Bank of Canada was actually the idea of the Bank of Canada is that it's an agency or an organization that exists that its interest is in essentially monitoring the state of affairs of the Canadian economy as a whole. So the Bank of Canada, though, it exists outside of the federal government. So certainly the federal government, which is elected, and sometimes because of the party politics, its economic goals can be tied to political agendas. The Bank of Canada exists outside of that, and it essentially advises the government, the federal government, and all Canadians, banks included, as to policy, monetary policy. All right, so the one of the key things that the Bank of Canada determines, and still to this day does so, is it determines interest rates. Okay, and it makes an announcement regarding that. And interest rates, as we discussed earlier, have quite a bit to do with how Canadians can earn on savings, and maybe more importantly in these times, the rates in which banks can set for loans. All right, so that's the Bank of Canada, and that actually has really been one of the sort of feathers in the cap of Canada in terms of a country being economically stable, because we have this organization. It has contributed to some economic stability over time. So Bennett should get credit for that. All right, and he established the Canadian Wheat Board to regulate wheat prices. All right, so in a similar way, this is just another agency here that's designed to try to protect the economic interests, specifically in this case to wheat farmers, because wheat is such a huge part of the Canadian economy. Okay, so that's essentially it for Bennett. We of course are not done with Bennett, because we will resume and we'll be talking about Bennett in another capacity. I'm going to get to that in a later video here. But that's it for Bennett and the end of this video.